Very good, very good. So good afternoon, everybody. Let's see. It's great that we have some early career faculty joining us. That's terrific. Hopefully, you will all find this interesting and valuable as you move forward with your career here at the University of Oklahoma. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Tomás Díaz de la Rubia. I'm the Vice President for Research and Partnerships here at the university. And today, we have here our colleagues from Lewis-Burke and Associates in Washington, D.C. Lewis-Burke and Associates is a firm that specializes in working with universities to help faculty succeed and develop a competitive edge in federal funding opportunities. So I've had the pleasure of working with the firm, with Lewis-Burke, for several years now. In my previous position at Purdue University, we worked very closely with them across many agencies, from the Department of Defense to the Department of Energy, NSF, NIH, NASA, and others. They bring an expertise to us that we do not have here on the campus, that universities typically don't have. And it's a very, very deep knowledge and understanding of how Congress and the federal government work when it comes to the research enterprise for the country. Okay? They have very deep tentacles into the agencies. They know the program managers. They know the congressional staff, the members of Congress. They talk to them. They get information. They, frankly, shape the agenda for research for the country through their work. And that knowledge and that information that they gain is transmitted to their clients. We're one of the clients, all mainly academic institutions. And it serves us to gain sort of a competitive edge in the very, very competitive world of federal funding for research. You're all early career faculty. You know what I mean. You experienced that during your graduate school years. You saw it through your thesis advisors and others, and now you're experiencing it in your own world, in your own career. So any advantage that we can gain to learn more about what agencies expect from us, what are the topics, what are the areas that are most exciting to them, to the federal government as we speak, where the opportunities are going to be in the future, is really important to us and to you, I hope. So I'm going to pass on the microphone to Bill, who is the point of contact for Lewis-Burke back in DC. But before I do that, I also want to introduce Ann West. Ann, where are you? I don't see you. Oh, there she is. Ann, as you know,
hi, everyone.
Is a professor of biochemistry here on the Norman campus, but also an associate vice president in my office, who is the point of contact for the university for the interactions with Lewis-Burke. She is working very, very closely together in a deep partnership with Carol Silva and the Center for Faculty Excellence, where Clara Smith, who I know is around, but maybe not on the call right now. Carol and Clara are working with Ann hand in hand to ensure that all of the information and insights that we get from Lewis-Burke are transmitted to you, that you have access to our colleagues at Lewis-Burke, that you can work with the Center for Faculty Excellence and Lewis-Burke together in understanding how to position your research and your careers for the most successful outcomes in federal funding opportunities. So let me stop there. And Bill, the floor is yours. And I hope you enjoy the webinar today. And we'll be doing a lot more of this down the road. So Bill, off you go.
Thank you. Excellent introduction. And thank you again. Again, my name is Bill Rush. I am the main point of contact for the Oklahoma team at Lewis-Burke Associates. We've been partnering with OU since about December 2019. So it's only been a few months, but I feel like it's already been a great and productive relationship. And, all thanks to a lot of the folks on this call, especially Tomás and Carol, Clara, and several others. So, for the early career faculty who are on this call, I think this is just a great sign that, your bosses are seriously investing in you. We're going to talk a little bit more about our firm, but we provide a lot of services to help out early career faculty, and all the way up to different center directors and Tomas himself when it comes to strategic development and finding different avenues of federal funding. Again, our firm is Lewis-Burke Associates, LLC. We've been doing this for about 28 years. And all we do is focus on universities, research institutes, and other research entities that are nonprofit out here in DC. So to really carve into this portfolio, we have a strong team with expertise really across the board. So if you can imagine anything that a research institute or a university would care about, we kind of cover. So for instance, we all have different issue expertise, and I want to make it clear that although the folks are going to speak a little bit more toward the agencies within their expertise, we have several others who aren't on the call today at the firm who we can bring in as needed to provide support. So, you're pretty much well covered across the board. And again, we have these strong understandings for relationships with congressional offices, but also different federal agencies. So I guess I'll start off with my introduction, then we can introduce the team and get a little bit more into the presentation today and hopefully a questions and answer period. I have been with Lewis-Burke for about 7 or 8 years. I think maybe actually 8. I'm not exactly sure, but I've been there for a while. I started right out of college. I started with the Michigan legislature when I was there throughout my time at Michigan State University in East Lansing. And from there, I took this job out of college, and I started as a legislative research assistant to a lobbyist, and now kind of a more senior role in kind of managing different teams and working with you all. So it's been an exciting time working at Lewis-Burke and learning more about this very dynamic workplace and all the experts that you're going to meet on this call. My personal expertise and what I kind of bring to the table is economic development and commercialization, so really bringing technology from lab to market, in addition to social behavioral sciences and domestic security. So think DHS and DOJ and the like. And I'm going to introduce my team right now, or have them introduce themselves to kind of go over their issue expertise and a little bit about their background. So I guess we'll start with Leland this time.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leland. I primarily cover energy issues. So any Department of Energy related questions, please send my way. I've been with Lewis-Burke now for a little over 5 years. And before that, I was on the Senate Appropriations Committee. And my responsibilities there were covering Department of Energy, including the national labs, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. And before that, I was at the Government Accountability Office, which is the auditing arm of Congress. And again, I primarily covered issues related to both energy and nuclear security.
Thanks. We'll move over to Naomi.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Naomi Weber. I cover engineering and physical sciences at Lewis-Burke with a focus on the fundamental side, so mainly National Science Foundation. I've been with Lewis-Burke about 8.5 years, and before that I was at the British Embassy, where I worked for the UK research agencies, and my role was to build international research partnerships between the UK and US funding agencies. And before that, I was doing a PhD in physical chemistry. Nice to meet you all.
Let's go with Paula. Paula, you're muted.
Sorry, I was having trouble. It wouldn't unmute. It refused my attempts to unmute. Hi, everybody. I'm Paula Trimble, and I have been at Lewis-Burke for 4 years now, and I lead our national security portfolio, which includes the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security, and I work on DHS with Bill, as well as the intelligence community. And my prior experience is that I spent 8.5 years working in the Department of Defense in a rapid prototyping and technology development office. And prior to that, I was in the space industry working for an aerospace company, as well as the FAA and the Department of Commerce in their space offices. Nice to meet you all.
Great. And then to the other doctor on our team, Nicole Parker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Parker. I work on the biomedical research portfolio here at Lewis-Burke. And I started at Lewis-Burke 3 months ago, so I haven't been here too long. But before that, I was working at a consulting firm that worked directly with NIH in their Office of Extramural Research. So from that experience, I became very familiar with grants policy, workforce policy, and training policy. Prior to that, I was completing my PhD in biochemistry at Johns Hopkins University.
Fantastic. And then finally to Victoria.
Hi, I'm Victoria Haber. I graduated from Ohio State this past December, and I studied economics and public affairs. I joined Lewis-Burke in March of this year, so very new. And I'll be primarily working on agriculture, transportation, and economic development.
Great. So Victoria has a lot of power. She's being a little bit modest. She's hopefully going to mute everyone. I know you all are muted, which is great. There's a bit of rules of engagement for you all kind of allowing us into your homes, which we really appreciate. But I guess also she's going to be monitoring the questions, which is important. We're hoping to have a question and answer period at the end. Throughout the presentation, you can use the chat box to ask questions, or we could just at the very end also have an opportunity for you to use the raise hand function, or just turn on your screen and raise your hand. We can call on you. So again, we're not going to be addressing them throughout the presentation. We're going to try to hold to the end because some of us are going to be sharing the screen and can't necessarily check those until the very end. Also, just please bear in mind that this is going to be recorded. So you'll have access to this as well. Also, we're going to send PDF copies of the slides. So please you don't have to write everything down. I think it's really important. You're going to see some with a lot of text on it, and that's by design. So you can just kind of go through it with our descriptions, and then you can kind of refer to those. So I'm going to try to share my screen, and somebody has to let me know if it worked. 1 second. And do we see the presentation?
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
so we see it.
Great. All right. Awesome. All right. So again, today's webinar, we're going to talk about, again, an introduction of Lewis-Burke, which we kind of went over here. Also a scan of the federal landscape. This is going to be very general, kind of high level. It's going to dig into, COVID-19, really the elephant in the room as far as funding and really agency processes. But also, the strong point of emphasis is that the government did not shut down. And there are several key programs that are still going on at different federal agencies with defined research portfolios that we know are going to continue going forward. So we're going to kind of talk at a very high level about, what those look like, what are some themes for the future that you can maybe consider for your research. This is not, of course, a comprehensive list of things that the government is interested in, but I think it's a really good sign of different emerging priorities and kind of how different agencies are translating those priorities to be more usable. Then we're going to go into some individual agencies and their different early career support streams. Again, not a comprehensive list. We can provide additional information on other agencies not covered on these slides, but again, a good scan of some of the key players in the space to give you a good idea of what to look for. And finally, I guess just before that, we're going to talk about how to really engage those federal agencies. What do you need to prepare ahead of time? What questions are good to ask? So I think that this is another opportunity where the slides are really going to come in handy to maybe refer to these later, especially after hopefully you've reached out to Lewis-Burke and we can help you get in touch with the right people. So starting right over here is that, again, Lewis-Burke, there's about 28 of us with diverse expertise. I think you all kind of know that now. But again, we're here to help provide you all a competitive advantage. We're here to help you kind of understand where your research is at and where it could go, where there could be homes at the different federal funding agencies for your work, including those that you've maybe considered before, and also those where, you might not be as familiar with. So we're really happy to do that. We work directly through the VPR's office. Our main point of contact is Ann West, who has said hello, and I think several of you know her. So she does a great job filtering different contacts from folks who want to reach out to us. And we'll describe a little bit later kind of what that looks like from the early career perspective. But for the most part, it turns out that you kind of can define your research, maybe give us a one-pager, and then have some questions in mind about what to do with it, where the home could be, and then Anne can usually help you get in touch. But we'll get a little bit more into the tactics of that later. But to kick things off, again, we're going to do a little bit about the state of play here in Washington. And for that, I'll turn things over to Leland to start.
Great. So this is just a high-level overview of where federal research funding currently stands. I know that a lot of you receive newsletters and other alerts, especially when the budget comes out, that research programs are slated for major cuts, but there's a difference between what the president proposes and then what actually happens, and it's Congress that has the power of the purse. And so these are examples of a few agencies that we picked out that, again, are large funders of research universities like NSF, NIH, Department of Energy, and even NEH and NEA, which were targeted for complete elimination. If you look at the trends over the last 5 years, research funding for these agencies has grown, and in fact, we're at, for some of them, at historically high funding levels. And the president's budget requests over the last 3 years have been ignored by Congress, and federal research in particular has a lot of strong bipartisan support, and we expect that to continue even this year. Next slide. And so if you look at fiscal year 2020, which is the current fiscal year that we're in, again, the president had proposed massive cuts. And the reality is, if you look there, it varies in terms of the actual percentage, but all of them are up. And that's good news, even as we enter these kind of uncertain times, that we do expect stability of funding for the federal agencies. And now that we're entering fiscal year 2021, we'll start on October 1st. Congress has been a little slow in starting this next appropriation cycle, now primarily because of COVID-19. But we do expect funding again to be stable as we enter the new fiscal year, and we do expect a continuing resolution, which means that agencies will be funded at current levels until Congress can actually pass final bills. That won't happen until after the November election, and it's too hard to predict when it will all be resolved, but at least for now, the agencies are in a good position because they have significant funding on hand. Next slide.
Okay, so COVID-19, I'm sure you all have heard of it. So right now, Congress is working very hard to, address everything that's happened from COVID-19. They've recently released a lot of stimulus packages, very targeted towards addressing the current issues and addressing some economic relief. We also know that this is having a huge impact on research communities. A lot of labs have had to completely ramp down, research has gone idle, and there's also a lot of questions, particularly for this group. I'm sure you're early on in your careers, you might be most vulnerable at this time point, and so what's the job market look like? What are the opportunities going to look like following this pandemic? In addition, even though COVID-19 is going on, life still goes on, and they are still operating in these federal agencies. They're working very hard to make sure that grants can still be awarded and grants are still being reviewed on time. And they, as Leland mentioned, they're still working on 2021 appropriations on Capitol Hill. Although the timeline is not clear, it is something that they've expressed that they're still constantly working on. And in addition, this year, we're in a special year because it's an election year. And so here at Lewis-Burke, in addition to tracking COVID-19, we're still going to be on top of tracking any type of transitions that could occur, whether it be in the administration itself, in the House, or in the Senate as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, program managers and program officers are still teleworking. They may be overwhelmed, but they're still responding to requests to talk about funding opportunity announcements, which are still coming out, that even ones that aren't related to COVID are still coming out, and also to talk about your applications that may have been recently reviewed. The White House Office of Management and Budget have instructed agencies to be extremely flexible during this time. If any of you all have any grants or have any deadlines coming up, the funding agency should have provided you with language to say that they're either extending application due dates or they're being flexible about what you can use your grant for, so on and so forth. In addition, this slide just talks about the stimulus bills that Congress has released. Like I mentioned, they are for near-term pandemic needs and urgent economic assistance. And in the future, we're expecting packages to address the remaining needs, the things that will be needed to ramp your labs back up, hopefully, and to jumpstart the economy. Next slide. So this slide and the next slide will just list out in detail the funds that were provided to these particular agencies through those stimulus packages. So as you can see, NIH has received $3.6 billion for COVID-19 related research. A lot of this, if you've been tracking it, has been in the form of administrative supplements or urgent or emergency competitive revision supplement grant mechanisms. And so this means you have to have a current NIH grant in order to apply to the supplement. It's a supplement on top of an award that you already have. We do anticipate new COVID-19 opportunities coming out. Actually today, like literally right before this call, NIAID released a new R01 and a new R21 for COVID-19 related research. So I think as time goes on, we'll definitely see more opportunities in that realm from NIH. HHS has received funds for provider relief at hospitals and for hospital preparedness. BARDA's received some funds to manufacture vaccines and diagnostic tools for testing COVID-19. In addition, the CDC has received a lump sum of money as well for public health preparedness and to really support testing environments and improvements. Next slide. Additional agencies that received funding were NSF. So NSF received $75 million for their Rapid Response Awards program, and they've been receiving applications for that, and they've already given out some awards as well. DOE received some funds, in addition to DOD, NEH, and NEA. So a lot of the agencies that fund universities have received a good amount of money to support grantees from their academic institutions. Sorry. Next slide.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. So it's not all COVID all the time here in Washington. Prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, the White House had already broadcast to federal agencies the priorities that it wanted to see reflected in their FY 2021 budget requests for research and development. So what we're seeing is that the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the Office of Management and Budget are directing agencies to focus on investments and increasing investments in industries of the future, which include quantum information science, artificial intelligence and machine learning, strategic computing, 5G and advanced and next generation communications, advanced manufacturing, biotechnology, next generation microelectronics, and space exploration. And then you can see on the right here, within these priority areas that the White House sends to the federal agencies, there are some new ones for FY21 that we wanted to highlight, specifically the focus on critical minerals, which agencies like the Department of Energy and Department of Defense and USGS are very focused on creating domestic sources of critical minerals and rare earth minerals, as well as new ways of creating those critical minerals. And within the industries of the future, you can see the AI, quantum science, and quantum computing remain priorities, as well as advanced manufacturing. But there's a new area on earth and environmental leadership that's largely influenced by the President's science advisor, Kelvin Drogemeyer, who many of you are probably familiar with. This third area here, Earth Systems Predictability, is the subject of a recent request for information from the National Science and Technology Council. So they're looking to inform those research priorities for the future. And then there's an expanded interest in health and bioeconomic innovation, including on the bioeconomy. And then space is a high priority for this administration. They recently created a new Space Force, which is similar to other military services like the Air Force and the Marine Corps. And they're also interested in supporting commercial space activities across the board for the research enterprise in the federal government. The White House is interested in workforce and education and training for the new economy, reflecting American values in research environments, so having more ethics and integrity in the research enterprise, and then leveraging big data and data analytics, as well as high-risk, high-reward research. And then another area that remains a priority is multi-sector partnerships. So any kind of public-private partnership, academia, government, and industry combined, that helps bring early-stage research into commercialization faster and brings it to market more quickly is something of interest. Next slide.
Great, and thanks everybody. So right now, before we kind of get into the different agency by agency efforts in this area, we feel like it's a little bit helpful to give some advice on how to engage with federal agencies. I know this might be unfamiliar with some folks on the line, but you know, a lot of these tips, and some of them are very basic. I want to preface this here. It's not to be any kind of condescending. I want to tell you that everything is on here for a reason. I feel like the subtitle for some of this could be "You'd be surprised." You know, some folks. Again, every bullet point has been crafted over several years from the folks who worked on these slides, sometimes through missteps that we've seen, but other times, again, there's a lot of helpful hints along the way. So I guess we'll kick things off with the benefit of reaching out to federal agencies. So I know it can be a little bit of a scary process, but as you can see it very bold at the bottom, Lewis-Burke is here to help you. We work quite a bit with cohorts of different early career faculty. We think that it's a little bit better to kind of maybe either send folks to Washington as cohorts or send them, I guess, would be virtual conversations as cohorts, so we can kind of engage everybody en masse, and we can work with some of your supervisors to do that. So if you're interested, please let the folks know, either above you or to work with Anne. We can find ways to, hopefully when things calm down a bit, maybe set up some trips to Washington, but also even setting up some individual engagements with the folks out here in DC. So again, the benefits of engaging directly with program officers are many. You know, first of all, you can learn more about their priorities, but also they can learn a little bit more about you, and they can give advice on, you know, the different research that you've put together, and try to find a way that it can work better at their home. And they can also give you some advice on, you know, where to go elsewhere with your research. So it's a great kind of send and receive type of relationship. I feel like, you know, through presenting this, they're aware of you and they can provide more support, way more so than you get from any kind of solicitation or even a kind of targeted webinar. The one-on-one interface is just, it can't really be beaten. Plus, you know, if you're active listening, you know, it's just a great way to learn more about what's going on at the agency. They like to also share what's future priorities and plans and directions in these meetings. And so that's really important to make sure that you bake into the conversation, which we can talk a little bit more on in a little bit. And also, more importantly, it's a fantastic networking opportunity. I feel like this is a great area where, you know, the strong networking aspect of academia meets the strong networking aspect of Washington in one space. There are ways that you can get involved and you can learn a lot and you can meet new people that way. And some of them are through these meetings, but in addition to other outreach, such as serving on advisory committees and review panels. These are fantastic ways to not only, of course, meet other peers, but to find out what kind of questions are being asked and what's actually being funded at the agencies. So that's another thing that we can help you out with going forward. So connecting with the right program officers, again, this was underlined in bold in the previous slide, that Lewis-Burke can really help with this process. It's, you know, important that you kind of give us some information on what your research area is, kind of where you've considered funding in the past, and then we can kind of help connect you with the right contacts, either at, you know, core agency for you, or maybe again, some agencies you haven't considered in the past. And then we like to leave it to you to make the connection. I feel like that's seriously important. You know, again, it can be a little bit weird sometimes if the lobbyist reaches out and makes these meetings for you, especially if you're early career folks. So it's important to kind of go through that process and actually schedule these conversations and discussions. But again, we can point to the right person, the right office, and then kind of leave it from there. So it's really important right now to note that contact over email is critical. absolutely critical. We're hearing that across agencies. I think it was preferred before, and now you really, really should, or else you might get completely left behind or overlooked. There's huge swaths of funding, as Nicole had, outlined, in different agencies that haven't been there before that have to get out the door. So a lot of these program officers are a bit overworked right now. So it's really important that you continue to contact them over email and then maybe follow up from there. Before you connect with them, it's important that you kind of take a look at what their research interests are, and then you prepare a one-pager that's kind of targeted toward that. So again, we can help you with your initial one-pager findings, but it would also help if it's tailored a little bit more to what they're looking for or what they're looking at. So the next one is a bullet, which is, again, you'd be surprised, dress appropriately, not necessarily for comfort, but this is a real business meeting. They will be likely dressed up in a button-up or whatever, and, you don't have to go in a tuxedo or anything, but just it's really important to look presentable because, a lot of these folks are very influential in their communities, and the first impression is extremely important. And, of course, this applies as well to video conferences. So we're dressed a little bit better on the Lewis-Burke team than normal. And there's a reason for that, even though we're on the video chat. But to make sure that, you keep that up and as you continue to meet with these folks and continue to prioritize that going forward. Again, describe your research in a compelling way. We can help a little bit with that. That's in a relevant field. They don't want you to come into their office or go up on their Zoom feed and then not know why you're there or what you're talking about. And then, again, please make it a connection. Please make it a way that you're asking targeted questions that are well thought out. That you can look at areas of interest for them on the front end and find out different patterns. There's a lot of strategies we can go into in future slides, but it's just important that you kind of make a thoughtful effort going into it and really have a game plan for things that you want to get covered through the conversation. And finally, send thank you emails. This is huge, especially if you go to Washington, maybe that night, maybe the next day, just to make sure that it doesn't get stale. I mean, they meet a lot of people, they talk to a lot of people. You want to continue to be on their radar. So again, prior to the meeting, a lot of this was covered in the previous slide, but just look at what they've funded in the past and look at their research portfolio. Look for different themes, look for different areas that have been tapped into, best practices. A lot of this stuff is available online, and we can help you at Lewis-Burke as well. But just, again, do a little bit of homework, do a little bit of background research on them, and I think that really prepares for a really strong conversation rather than just going in blind. Again, prepare a one-pager that includes your contract information. That's also very important, and sometimes it gets overlooked. And descriptions, again, should be consistent with areas of the target agency. And one great thing, too, is over here is that at Oklahoma, with all the efforts to bring together different researchers and different thrusts, I think there's a great network here where hopefully some folks you can bounce ideas off of. Maybe a more senior faculty member, maybe another early career person who's been through this before. That is a fantastic way to support one another that is just organic, I feel like, to a great research university like Oklahoma. So please take advantage of that wherever possible. And then again, prepare to ask questions. Just don't, be on send the entire time. Just find ways to elicit more information about them. This is fundamentally about really gathering information because this isn't like an interview. This isn't like an oral solicitation. This is a good way to gather intel on how you can best tailor your presentation and your solicitation. So again, these are just some examples of questions to look at. I'm not really going to go too far into this, but again, now is your chance to really elicit more information and find out what areas of emphasis really are. You can ask them about what future priorities are. You can ask them questions based on your one-pager. I think to reference that a lot really makes it a more and more important tool. And then you can also ask them, like, what should I do to submit a better project? Maybe if you've had trouble in the past, what are some of the barriers you're running into? What are some of the rates with resubmittals and success rates? What are some opportunities, again, to serve on an advisory committee or to serve as a reviewer? Again, I'll leave these on the slides here to refer to, but I think that these are just really tactical questions that I would hope you all could tap into as you look into this going forward. And then finally, meeting follow-up. This is extremely important. I think it gets lost in the shuffle because, especially if you come all the way out to Washington or you go all the way to your couch and start a Zoom meeting, and it can get kind of lost that you went through all that effort to prepare and the one-pager and then the follow-up. I mean, this is really about building relationships here. I feel like a follow-up email where you, of course, thank them for making the time, strong appreciation, even if you feel like the meeting didn't go well, which happens sometimes, quite frankly, and just making sure that they're aware that you're appreciative of their time, that you can I would also attach that short summary just so they have another spot. You've already sent it. And then if there's any follow-up action items, make sure that you ask those in email and follow up on those going forward. And continue the main lines of communication really throughout your career, as long as they're there. If you feel like you have a strong partner and somebody who can really help out going forward, I wouldn't overuse it, but definitely know that it's a tool. And I think that that's a big part of their jobs as well, is to reach out and to work with you all. So again, faculty program can be key advisors throughout this process. But of course, we're also here to help at Lewis-Burke. And now we're going to dive a little bit more into different agencies, and we'll start off with NSF and their career program.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So a quick summary of what's going on at the National Science Foundation. So funding levels are pretty good at NSF right now. 8.3 billion in the last fiscal year, and we expect a similar amount for the next fiscal year, despite what was included in the president's budget request. NSF continues to focus on their 10 big ideas for future investment. So if you haven't heard of these are 6 research ideas, which are listed in this table to the right, and 4 process ideas. So a lot of what NSF is doing is focused on those activities, but if your research does touch some of those areas, it's worth looking into the solicitations for additional opportunities that you might not have naturally thought of. But these have been around since 2016, so NSF is kind of looking into what comes next. There's a big focus this year on industries of the future, as we said earlier from that OMB OSTP memo. So that includes things like quantum, artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, advanced wireless, and things like that. NSF also has an emerging interest in engineering biology across different directorates. And what they're looking for there does vary a lot across the directorates. We have the new AI institutes, which are currently being reviewed, and NSF plans to run those again in the future. And then there's also this big interest in partnerships. So if you do have a research project where you engage with different stakeholders, be it industry, foundations, other government agencies, NSF is always interested to hear about those. So going forward, NSF has a new director coming in. As we said earlier, Kelvin Drogemeyer is the acting director of NSF. Lots of directorates are having changes. So there's a new directorate of the Computational Sciences Directorate. SBE had a big program realignment last fall. Engineering is introducing a new visioning capability, which means they're establishing a group to help them be more forward-looking and strategic in what they're supporting. Bio is introducing these new integration institutes to encourage more collaboration within and across the biological sciences. And then there's going to be a new assistant director for mathematical and physical sciences, hopefully sometime. We also have a new major initiative called Coasts and People that came out late last week. And going forward, there's going to be new activities related to infrastructure, trust, and advanced manufacturing. Next slide. Okay, so NSF supports its researchers in a number of ways. So a majority of what NSF does is the investigator-driven bottom-up proposals in core disciplines. So despite all we hear about focus solicitations, the big ideas, a majority of what NSF funds is still investigator-driven. NSF does Dear Colleague letters to highlight areas of interest, and then they have these more focused solicitations, which are often involve multiple directorates across NSF. They also support workshop and coordination networks, and those workshops you can often get approved very quickly. If they're sort of 50 to 100K, you contact your program officer and they're able to assess those through an internal review and get you a decision within 6 weeks. NSF also supports people directly. They have their eager and rapid rewards to respond quickly to new and emerging opportunities, such as COVID-19. And then they have supplemental awards to existing awardees, which is a great opportunity to add a new activity or international collaboration onto what you're already working on. And then probably most relevant for this group is the career awards to early faculty. and I'll talk a bit more about them in a minute. The review process is very focused on scientific merit and broader impact, so you really have to address both of those, but how those are interpreted does vary a lot across the agency. So that's why serving as a reviewer is a really good way to better understand how NSF actually interprets what it says it does in real time. And then NSF program directors do have more flexibility than some other agencies in which proposals they're selecting. So that's another reason why it's a really good idea to have those strong relationships with the program officers. I remember, just as a small story, when I used to work for the funding agencies, I remember a review panel, the person said, it was very close between two people, and they said, well, this person was really rude to me at a conference and was saying that the agency was really bad, so I don't look upon them fondly. So never push in front of someone in a coffee line, and even if someone says from an agency is really rude, you have to just not retaliate. Okay. So the NSF career program is across the whole of NSF, and really this is for the agency to select the research and education leaders of the future. So this is how NSF wants to support their future superstars. They want to support projects that are bigger and more ambitious than just a single, small standard research activity. So you need to think about a really ambitious, comprehensive research agenda that you want to carry out for the next 5 years. So both engineering and biological sciences can support projects up to 500K. The other directorates are 400K. And then there's a list of eligibility requirements there. The deadline for proposals this year is July 27th. Next slide. So some recommendations for career. As I said before, it should be expansive enough to build your career on. So it can't be just a narrow, very defined research goal. It has to be very broad. What the program officers are looking for does vary across division. So you have to speak to the relevant program officer. It's no good just speaking to the people who run the career program. And they will advise you on the balance in their division or program on the focus on things like education projects or partnership with others. They tell us that a department chair's letter of support to show how the education is going to contribute to broader activities at the institution. They don't necessarily want you to just create a new activity, but how you're going to embed what you're doing with the broader goals of your institution is always a good idea. So you only get 3 chances to apply for a career proposal. We've heard from NSF that a lot of people get rejected initially because they miss some, the administrative side of things. So pay attention to details and make sure you use all your university's resources to advise you on all the technical side of things. So you kind of have to balance between waiting long enough to have some foundational research activity under your belt, but not waiting so long that you can't use your second and third tries when people tend to be a lot more successful in the career program. Most people don't do well on their first attempt, so don't be discouraged. Really use any feedback you get from the review panel. And once you've had a chance to process that, we always recommend that you follow up with the program officer and ask how you could better adjust your proposal for the next attempt. Over to Paula.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. All right, so this slide is intended to give you a little bit of an overview of how much money we're talking about when we talk about science and technology funding at the Department of Defense. For context, the DoD's total budget is on the order of $750 billion. And so $16.1 billion of that in FY 2020 is set aside for science and technology programs. And that's basic 6.1 research, applied research 6.2, and 6.3 advanced technology development. And I would say the proportion of those accounts is in increasing order. So the smallest amount of funding goes for basic research across DoD, then applied, then advanced technology development. There was a slight increase to basic research in FY20, about 3% above the previous year. And then it's not on here, but the request for this coming year, FY21, is a little bit below the enacted level for FY20, but fairly static. Some major things happening at the Department of Defense was, I think I mentioned previously, the creation of the Space Force, which is primarily an operational activity for the department. Some of the applied research accounts are moving from the Air Force into the Space Force, but most of the basic space-related research will still be handled at the Air Force Office of Scientific Research and the Air Force Research Lab. More broadly, the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, Mike Griffin, who's also known as the DoD's Chief Technology Officer, has set a number of top technology priority areas that align with the National Defense Strategy. And these areas are each led by an assistant director or a technical director in the department who is designing a science and technology roadmap for each of these areas that then helps the individual funding offices like DARPA and the services in developing new programs. So the main areas here are 5G, hypersonics, which was the top technology area in the department until very recently, when microelectronics was named as the top technology challenge that is being addressed. Other areas include directed energy, command control and communications, space, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence and machine learning, missile defense, quantum science and computing, autonomy, and biotechnology. But at the department, because they're so mission focused, the nearer term capabilities tend to be prioritized. And that means that there's more funding available for later stage development and prototyping. However, there is additional funding across the board for artificial intelligence, quantum information science, and hypersonics. Next slide. So Department of Defense has created some programs that are really intended to help develop the pipeline of researchers in their earlier stages. And their intent really is to encourage an interest in national security research, and also to help, I think, maybe make DoD's mission focus a little bit less opaque for researchers. So they've created a series of young investigator programs. Each program is managed separately by one of the military services research offices or by DARPA. And they all have different criteria because the DoD is all about making it easy for you. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview on each of them. They all have different deadlines. They all have their own program solicitations. The first up here is the Office of Naval Research, which has their Young Investigator Program, or YIP, seeks applicants who are in their first or second full-time tenure track position, with their degree being after January 1st of 2012. So the program, again, looking for outstanding faculty members in institutions of higher education to work on the Department of the Navy's research programs. And the solicitation comes out annually for this YIP and is designed to align with the Navy's major science and technology research areas, which are found on their website. Typical funding for projects is $170,000 a year for 3 years. And we expect that ONR's funding opportunity announcement for the YIP should be coming out fairly soon. Usually June is the release timeframe for this, with deadlines in late August or September. I will say that all of the military services are being extremely lenient and extending many of their deadlines for programs in light of the limitations associated with COVID-19 and social distancing and stay-at-home orders. So it's possible that these deadlines may be lengthened. The Air Force Office of Scientific Research has their YIP program, and they support scientists and engineers who have received their PhD on or after April 1st, 2013. So their eligibility, it differs from ONR, and a lot of times I've worked with researchers who try to kind of game this system. So they will apply to the programs in which they would sort of time out of first, And then the ones that they would be eligible for a longer period of time, they will apply for maybe the following year or later in order to maximize their chances of winning multiple programs through different services. So this one has a maximum of $450,000 over 3 years, so that's the total. Generally, they break down per year to be pretty close to each other. And the Air Force aligns their YIP with the research topics that are listed in its long-range research interests for the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, which is a long-range BAA that is posted on grants.gov. This year, the YIP solicitation came out in March, and the proposals are currently due July 14th. I haven't seen any change to that due date, but we will certainly advise those who are interested if that does change. Next slide. And then we have the Army Research Office. So we've covered the Navy, the Air Force, and here's the Army. Army's YIP supports tenure track faculty who are less than 5 years from receiving their PhD. So again, you can look at these dates and timeframes and determine which one you're eligible for now that you may not be eligible for in the future, and go there first, depending on your research focus areas. They also solicit this directly through their Army Research Office broad agency announcement. So the broad agency announcement lays out all of the research interests for ARO, and within that they solicit young investigators under that BAA. So there's no separate BAA for the Army Research Office's YIP program. This one is open for a long period of time, so they just leave this one open through March 2022, when it will likely be replaced with the next set of BAA topics. Awards are $120,000 a year for 3 years. DARPA also has a young faculty award program. They don't call it a YIP, they call it a YFA. Same idea, they're looking to encourage and develop researchers in junior faculty or equivalent positions. It is limited to current tenure track assistant or associate professors and to tenured assistant or associate professors within 3 years of their tenure appointment. And they offer $500,000 over 2 years, so it's a significantly higher value program, much harder to get as well. And their program announcements usually come out in the summer. They typically hold a pretty lengthy webcast or webinar for folks who are interested, where they go through not only the mechanics of their program, but also, really describe a lot of what Bill went over at the beginning about building relationships with program managers and understanding the programs. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I wanted to note was, given that University of Oklahoma is a depth score eligible institution, meaning that you are in a state that falls under the current depth score calculations for the DoD, there is augmented funding provided to each of the young investigator programs at the military services, specifically to award depth score eligible proposals. So it gives you somewhat of a competitive advantage under these early career programs at the DoD that you are in a depth score eligible state. Each of the military services awards 2 to 3 additional awards for depth score investigators, and they conduct it through the existing young investigator program solicitations. There's also a standalone depth score competition. The last round of this is already closed and in the award phase, but there's a new funding opportunity that's being finalized now, expected in the next few weeks. But this one initially was created to marry up or matchmake researchers who have never received DoD funding with experienced DoD researchers who have received funding within the last 7 years. So it's another opportunity for younger researchers to learn about the DoD and understand how to build the relationships for future funding. Next slide. There's on this slide here, we've over the years collected information from various program officers, and so this is kind of the best practices from ONR on how to pursue the Young Investigator program. They always, and in fact, if you read the program announcements, they always encourage you to contact the program officer first. So within these BAAs, they typically list the program officer who works in a specific research interest area. They highly encourage you to contact them, to lay out options for proposals you're considering submitting, and get feedback prior to submitting to the solicitation. You know, as Bill said, you should really take the time to get to know these people and to understand their portfolio. They're not leaving anything out. If they've left it out, it's because it's not part of their portfolio. They want to see, you know, a record of you publishing in peer-reviewed journals, have a strong letter of support from your university or department, and have your complete CV submitted with your white paper and proposal package. Next slide. And then this is just some examples. The DoD, you know, because it kind of marches to the beat of its own drum, also has some specific processes it uses to evaluate proposals for funding. On the left side here, you'll see what are known as the Heilmeier questions or the Heilmeier catechism. This is a very commonly used approach to looking at proposals. And these are the questions that as you're building your proposal, you should be thinking about answering for the program officer. You know, what are you trying to do? How is it done today? And what are the limits of that? What's new about your approach? You know, who cares? Who would this impact? If you're successful, what difference would it make? And so these are really kind of the threshold questions that particularly DARPA, but also other DoD agencies are looking at. On the right side here, you just see two examples of what is known as a quad chart format. Many researchers I've met with have not previously done quad charts, but they are kind of like a common one-pager that is distributed to familiarize and socialize your ideas in the Department of Defense. We are happy to provide you these templates in a full-page format and also to help evaluate any quad charts that you want to develop.
Great. So on to the Department of Energy. So again, Department of Energy, like Department of Defense, is a mission agency. While it does fund a lot of basic research, you always have to consider what they call use-inspired research. What is it leading to a new energy technology of some kind? DOE, again, has strong bipartisan support and has seen huge increases over the last several years. But a bit like DoD, don't get too excited by the funding levels. Yes, it's pretty much a $39 billion agency, but in terms of direct grants that go to research universities, you're really about $4 billion. So that's even smaller than NSF in terms of total dollars. But those research universities that take the time to build a relationship with DOE then tend to be very successful. In terms of research priorities, I won't go into any detail, but I listed them here. They track very closely to the industries of the future and the R&D priorities that Paula discussed before in terms of quantum, AI, scientific machine learning, the microelectronics. DOE is trying to address all the plastic waste, especially single-use plastics. And of course, energy storage is considered the holy grail on bringing more renewables onto the grid. So a lot of investment in materials and chemistry and prototypes of new batteries and other energy storage devices, both for cars as well as for grid applications. They're gearing up in engineering and synthetic biology, but for them, it's for developing new bio-inspired materials as well as bioproducts. And then, as Paula mentioned, critical minerals, and for DOE, it's how to find low-cost, abundant alternatives to rare earths, so we reduce our dependence on China. Then the Office of Science specifically is the largest funder of the physical sciences in the government, provides about 45% of total funding across the government in the physical sciences. But DOE also does fund biological science and earth and environmental system science, et cetera. And as I mentioned, within the Office of Science portfolio, 40%, that's been a constant number for many years now, goes directly to fund research universities, which right now is about $1 billion a year. And very important is what they call these basic research needs workshop reports. That's what defines the research priorities and the funding opportunities. And the AI for Science there is just an example of the most recent one that they did. And then ARPA-E, for those that are not as familiar, in 2009, actually when I was on the Hill, we created this new agency within DOE to invest in new high-risk energy technologies. And it's basically, it provides awards and it funds a technology development project for 3 years. And the topics change as new program managers come in every few years, a bit like DARPA, for those that are familiar with DARPA, because it was inspired by DARPA. Next slide. So in terms of engaging with the Office of Science, as I mentioned, so the Office of Science really has 6 major program areas that are listed there, and it goes everything from materials and chemistry all the way to nuclear and particle physics. And so it really covers a broad span of research programs. And they really are identified by the science community. So DOE will host workshops and it'll bring together anywhere from 30 to 100 experts at all different stages of their career to help define what those future priorities are. And so again, very important to participate in those. In terms of funding mechanisms, it's everything from your single principal investigator award all the way to large scale centers that can range up to $25 million a year. There are targeted funding opportunity announcements in specific topic areas, as well as the equivalent of an open BAA, which they call their financial assistance program. And that's really, again, if it's your first time, trying to get DOE funding, that's a great mechanism to build a relationship with a program manager. Like NSF, they're very accessible. They want to talk to you about your research, and they do offer you guidance. For those that talk to them in advance, you see that your rate of success significantly improves. And then DOE, like other agencies we've just discussed, also has a dedicated early career research program. That one is tied to the amount of total research funding that goes to the Office of Science. So the good news is, as its budget has grown, so have the awards for early career researchers, which has been great. The annual funding call usually comes out in November. And the awards are for $750,000 for 5 years. And again, like most of these, there's criteria of who can apply, and there's a lot of details on the funding call. And then in those 6 program areas, there's details in terms of the types of research that they're looking for from their early career research folks. Next slide. And then slight variation for the applied energy offices. So these are the programs in wind, solar, fuel cells, and nuclear energy, as well as in oil and gas and fossil energy type applications. So for ARPA-E, as I mentioned, you want to talk directly to the program manager. And participate in the workshops that they have. For the applied energy programs, each one of them has what's called a multi-year program plan, which defines what their 5-year research priorities are. There's an example there on the right. All of them have it. And then especially for early career researchers who have never received an applied energy award but are interested in one, volunteering for the annual peer reviews is critical. It really gives you great insights into the program, and DOE gives you bonus points for participating, and they will give you a higher score when they evaluate your proposal when you're submitting one. And there's an example, example there on the right of one that's actually coming up because of COVID-19. They're moving forward, but in virtual style. But they are still doing these type of peer reviews. And the last thing I want to say, this is DOE, and they see their competitive advantage is supporting 17 national labs. And a lot of these funding calls, especially in the applied energy programs, require a national lab partner. So fostering and building relationships with one or more of those national labs are essential. Turn it over to Nicole.
Thanks, Leland. So this is just an overview of NIH. So for fiscal year 2020, NIH received $41.7 billion in our budget, and that's the 5th consecutive increase. And so over the past 5 years, this budget has grown by 40%, and it will most likely continue to grow. It's good to note that most of this funding is for extramural research. So most of this money is being given out to academic institutions, and it's coming out of the largest funding institutes. As you all know, NIH has 27 institutes and centers, and they all have different budgets. And so most of the funding is going to your NCI, NIAID, NHLBI, and so you'll often see large opportunities coming out of institutes such as those. Across the agency, area focus, they're still very focused on the 21st Century Cures Act initiatives, which include the BRAIN Initiative. Opioids is still a big focus for NIH, and aging and Alzheimer's research. They're also focused on ending sexual harassment in science. That's been a huge issue lately, and so they're really working hard in the Office of the Director to combat sexual harassment and gender harassment in science. And also they're still working to combat foreign influence. That's an important trans-agency focus for them. Emerging trends. So NIH is just getting into the AI game, and so at the end of last year, the advisory committee to the director had a working group for artificial intelligence and machine learning and biomedicine. And so they're currently at this moment figuring out how AI and biomedical research can integrate with one another. And so it's important to note that now is the time to kind of provide input into what AI looks like at NIH. In addition to that, this is an opportunity where computer engineers, computer scientists, data scientists can get into some opportunities at NIH. They are really trying to integrate the workforce skills. And so there have been several opportunities from different institutes for data scientists that want to learn more about biomedical research and some fellowships and just ways to kind of bring the two skills together so it can work hand in hand in the future. They're also focused on nutrition research. That's an emerging trend. Maternal and child health research is very big across all of HHS. And the thing I'm going to focus on this slide is their Next Generation Researchers Initiative. And so in December 2018, the advisory committee to the director had a Next Generation Researchers Initiative working group. And this working group released a lot of recommendations, and you can find those publicly on their report. And NIH right now is working on implementing those recommendations. And so what you'll see, because NIH, it is 27 different institutes and centers, so you'll see 27 different institute and center rules for how they're implementing these programs. And so some institutes have, for example, I'll say NHLBI has applied a different pay line for early career researchers. And you'll find that a lot of institutes are doing what they can within their budget to make sure there are more opportunities for early career researchers to get that first R01 grant. And so whenever you are applying, just be sure to look to see if there are some special opportunities for you all at that institute, because it will vary from institute to institute. In addition, future award opportunities include the High Risk, High Reward Awards program. These are very targeted towards early stage investigators. They often don't require as much data as a typical R01, and they're really looking for early career researchers to be innovators. And so that's kind of the target audience for these awards. And I'm gonna jump down. There's some more award opportunities listed here, but another important thing is that there are administrative supplements in areas of emphasis. So of course, there's opportunities in COVID-19 right now, that's obvious, but they've also implemented some supplements to promote research continuity and retention. And so recently this year, NIH released 2 administrative supplements, one for someone with a K award that is looking to transition to an independent R award to have supplement funds, and another award is for an early career researcher that is on their first R01 and they're looking to transition into their next R01. So typically the rules for these supplements are if you had a life event like a lot of early career researchers do, maybe you recently adopted, or you've had a kid, or you had to take care of a parent or a loved one, something like that, they want to offer you supplement funds so you can have enough funds to keep your program running and still have time to apply for that next opportunity. Next slide. So how to engage with NIH. So, understand the type of funding opportunity you're applying to. There are tons of grant mechanisms, too many to name. A lot of us are very familiar with the R01 because that's, what we're going for our first award for sure. But there's also smaller awards. There's R03 and R21s. They're great exploratory research awards when, you might have a small project that you just need some funding for to get more data that can ramp you up to the R01. The program officers are listed on all the solicitations. I encourage you to always reach out to the program officer associated with your solicitation and make a relationship with that person. I can't stress this enough of how different each institute is. So just because you might have gotten an award from NIAID doesn't mean it's going to be the same type of process for NCI. Also engage with your Office of Sponsored Research, right? So if you might be unfamiliar with how to apply for a career development award, but you've applied for a fellowship award before, they will be able to help you through this process. When you're contacting NIH, you want to summarize your aims, give them an attachment. Bill kind of explained this at the beginning of the call, at the beginning of the presentation, but always be courteous, of course. And make sure you review your peer review panels and the members. And I think someone asked in the chat a question about encouraging early career researchers to be on review panels. NIH also encourages this. They have a early career researcher program for being on reviewer panels. And so since that question was specifically asked, I'll make sure that we add that link to this presentation before we PDF it and send it out to you all. And then, and I think that's all I'll say on that
slide. Great, thanks so much, everybody. Again, this is gonna be just some additional federal early career opportunities just to show that we do track far and wide here. And again, this is not all of them, but this a few more issue areas to keep in consideration because this really is a priority across research agencies. Department of Justice, which is one area that I do cover. So if you do criminal justice research or the social behavioral sciences, quite frankly, they're a little bit tighter than they have been in getting a lot of the same applications from the same superstar, either universities or senior faculty members. So they used to have an early career faculty solicitation, and now it's just a prioritization within existing solicitations at the National Institute of Justice, which is the main research arm at DOJ. So for instance, they have one on forensic sciences, another one on human trafficking research, and those were early ones that we saw this tacked onto those solicitations, but that's expected to continue. At the U.S. Department of Agriculture, in their Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, so AFRI, they have an annual competition that supports new investigators, and this helps really across the board to apply for research, education, extension activities, and projects. And again, this is a continuation that is often given out every single year. And finally, NEH, the City NEH Fellows Program is a very prestigious award of the National Endowment for Humanities. And as you can see, there's a pretty high bar for the output, from books to articles to digital material and publications, et cetera. So translations and other main resources. So it's a very, again, prestigious fellowship program that has a pretty nice stipend in addition to support from the endowment for help. So that's kind of really everything we want to talk about today. Again, our contact information is right here. Pretty simple email addresses. And if you just have to remember one or two, remember Anne's, because she's kind of our main point of contact with OU. But also mine is bill@lewisburke.com. And I'm happy to connect you with others on the team and others at our firm if you have any other questions kind of beyond our reach. So right now, I'd like to open it up to different questions. Let me stop sharing my screen with the little bit of time we have left. And good, looks like there are some questions here. So Victoria, do you want to maybe go through the chat questions if you're still online?
Yeah, so there's been a bit of back and forth. Some of the questions have sort of been answered, but we can just start off at the top and see if we want to kind of expand on some of the answers. So the first one was from Fran Stevens, asked, do you also encourage the early career PIs to be on review panels? And the answer was yes. I think we touched upon that a little bit from Leland and then Naomi in her slides. The next question was, do you see benefit in being a reviewer to gain experience on what is being looked for in a submission? And then the second part of that was, if yes, do you overview the agency review process differently with them? So I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit. Or if
yeah, so I think again, every agency is a little different, but in general, those that do offer these types of peer reviews and review panels, it is such a great opportunity because you get to see, first of all, what the scope of the research is. You get to see what other ideas that people have submitted, what their actual proposals have looked like. You also get to meet the various program managers that are responsible for the programs that you may be interested in the future. For at least the DOE ones, for example, with the peer review, you also rub elbows with national lab and industry folks. And so a lot of people create relationships that then they use as partners in future proposals. And as I mentioned, at least for DOE, if you serve as the peer reviewer and then you later submit a proposal, it might be again, that extra bonus that gives you an advantage. It obviously still has to meet all of the technical criteria, but if the scores are close between two proposals, they will go for the one that served as a peer reviewer. I don't know if folks wanted to expand a little bit on some of their agencies.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Leland, particularly for NIH, I think, being a part of that review panel is very helpful because you get to sit in on the study section. And so it's very common amongst early career researchers and researchers that haven't received a lot of NIH funding in the past is that they don't often make it to study section. So I think it's just very encouraging for you to sit on that review panel so you can see what it takes to get there and how things are being discussed and how they're, and what caliber the proposal has to be in order to make it to study section as well.
Okay, great. And then we can hop down a little bit and maybe address some of the questions that haven't been responded to in the chat box. So one that I just received was, has funding been diverted from other agency priorities into COVID, or does the COVID funding come entirely from the supplemental funding?
So I can, were you going to speak? Sorry.
We all know this one. You're the COVID slides.
Yeah, so I can specifically speak towards NIH. I will say that a lot of the opportunities have come specifically from that supplemental funding. However, a lot of institutes have taken it upon themselves to provide urgent funding through their own budgets for COVID-19. Obviously, we do not know where they pulled the money from exactly, but we do know that it's coming out of their own budgets. I don't know if you all want to touch on your agencies and whether they're moving money around or not, or if it's just from the supplement.
I will
okay.
definitely been from the supplement. Oh, go ahead, Leland, same thing.
No, for the most part, the bulk of the money is going to comes from the supplement and future supplements. Agencies have some discretion, but a lot of that funding was already allocated for programs and projects and activities prior to COVID-19. So there's not a lot of just free money floating around. And the big question for future supplementals is where will the funding come from for restart activities for labs at national labs or research universities, as well as how to pay for the people and students that were involved in those research activities or perhaps couldn't continue because of COVID-19. That's still a little bit up in the air, but for the most part, no significant amount of money has been diverted for COVID-19 purposes.
Next, a question from Sherry Castle. She said, do you expect NIH to have new funding opportunities for COVID-related research? Would be specifically looking at NICHD, NIDA, or NIMH?
Yes, to your question, Sherry. Like I mentioned before, there have been a lot of supplements released. I can say that NIDA and NIMH have already released supplements related to COVID-19, and they're very focused. So NIDA is very focused on, if you are a drug user, or if you have HIV or things of that nature, like how is COVID-19 impacting you? NIMH is very interested in looking at how, mitigating the exposure to COVID-19. How is that affecting our mental health? We're all isolated. The calls to the suicide hotline are up, things of that nature. So, this has really affected a lot of our behaviors. So I think there will be a lot of opportunities coming out of NIMH. I also anticipate NICHD to look into how this is impacting learning and development in children. A lot of kids have been removed from schools and things of that nature. And also we know that apparently the COVID-19 is not impacting children as much as it's impacting the elderly. So I think that all these agencies, I think all the institutes will be releasing some type of COVID-19 related research opportunities. And as mentioned earlier, we're monitoring that very closely at Lewis-Burke.
Great. And then one question is pertaining specifically to the Department of Defense, mentioning that they've tried 3 times so far and have felt discouraged. Is there any advice or recommendations how to better succeed with DoD funding or opportunities?
Yeah, I looked at this question, but I think I need more detail on where at DoD was attempted. So I think we should take this one as a follow-up and follow up specifically with the researcher so that we can provide better advice. I did see up above that, though, there was a question about the Air Force Young Investigator Program, and that is correct. Their announcement does not say anything about being tenure track. The only eligibility requirement, other than being at an institute of higher education, is the date of doctorate no earlier than April 1st, 2013. So that one is open to non-tenure track researchers.
Okay. And then one other question is, what specific information would Lewis-Burke like for a 1-page summary from OU faculty? If faculty have funding announcements that faculty have found, should we send them to Lewis-Burke to get advice?
So this is Naomi. I can take a first stab at this one. So it depends which way round it is. If you want Lewis-Burke's help with identifying relevant program officers, we have a sort of 1-page questionnaire that asks the questions that we need the answers to get started. We also, another thing, if you have an announcement that you want to engage with a program officer and submit a 1-pager, we also have a template 1-pager that just puts out things of things you should include in that 1-pager to the program officer. So I hope that answers that question, and we can send those as follow-up. Carol?
Yeah, I was just going to say thanks, Naomi. That's great. It looks I answered him, but I answered him privately by mistake.
Okay.
Our answers are pretty similar. I also suggested that he contacted either me or Anne, and that we can help him get some of those pieces put together so that they are ready for you all to take a look at. I would love to see the template stuff. I have pieces, but not all of them, I think. So if y'all would send those to me and Anne, that would be great too.
Great. And if we have time for one more, it was, what is the best way to seek out review panel opportunities, and does it vary by agency?
So I'll start with NSF. You just have to send your a short CV to the program officer with it. You could just send an email saying, I'm interested in being a reviewer. Hit, a brief paragraph on your background. My CV is attached. Please let me know if I can be of assistance. But that's a really good thing if you do have that one-on-one meeting to offer.
Okay, and I think we'll just clear the rest of the questions in the queue, the last minute or two. So I think there was one more from Kara and then one from Sherry, and then you all have our contact information going forward.
So the next one from Kara is our collaboration expectations for Young Investigator Career Awards different from other awards.
So I think in general, the agency advice is the collaboration should benefit the research. So what is the collaborator adding? And you don't want it to be so much that they're saying, well, why isn't this industry partner funding this anyway? So it is different from other awards. So for example, for bigger center scale awards, the industry will have a lot more involvement, and it would be a lot more advanced engagement into delivering, more of product delivery kind of thing.
And then from Sherry Castle, any insights on engaging with ACF or OPRE?
Nicole, I think this is in HHS. Is that right? The Office of Planning, Research, Evaluation.
I think ACF is, I don't know. I know Carrie usually answers ACF questions. I can get back to you.
Yeah, we'll definitely provide more information too.
Yeah.
There's just, of course, there's just some that we can just rattle off the top of our heads, and then, it falls with our different agencies too, especially with Nicole and the Institute of NIH and then all of HHS. So we'll definitely send some stuff your way so you can better understand, Head Start and childcare research as well. I think that should be everything from right now. I know that, we have to wrap up and everyone kind of has to go on to other calls and time. But great questions kind of all around. I hope this was a really helpful exercise. And again, this is just kind of an introduction to some of the main opportunities in the space for early career researchers. I will say that, it helps, again, for OU to work with us, but also work with some of the senior folks that are your supervisors. And sometimes it helps as well, especially when it comes to cohort opportunities in DC, to send groups of researchers around similar thrusts or in different colleges. That way we can kind of engage them all at once and kind of do these one-off trips. But if it's just individual questions, we're also happy to help with that as well. So thanks again for making the time. And again, these slides are going to be sent to you as well as a recording of this. And we're going to try with any other follow-up that we have to make sure that you all have that resource as well. So thank you, and we'll definitely talk to you soon.
Thanks everybody.
You, Bill and team. You were great. We appreciate all the time you spent with us today.
Great, thanks so
much. Really do.
Following up with a number of things. So,
yes, we will.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everybody. We really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Bye everybody.